Okay, hi class. This PowerPoint is a short review of climate. I know we talked about this first semester, but you will also be tested on it this semester, as climate is very important to our human impact projects. Especially a lot of you are going to be mentioning climate change, so I want you to make sure that you understand what climate actually is. For these notes, you're going to take them just like you did your population ecology notes, which means you're going to, when I change the slide, you're going to pause it, copy down whatever you need to, and then press play in order to understand a little bit about the slide. If you want to wait, there's a couple slides where you don't have to write much down, so if you want to wait for me to explain what to copy on certain slides, that's fine. Okay, so we're going to move to the first slide. You want to copy this whole slide down, so go ahead and pause it, and then play it when you're ready. But climate is different from weather, because weather is actually just the day-to-day conditions on the Earth's atmosphere, similar to this picture that we have right here. And climate itself is the average year-to-year conditions, so what we see right here. Weather you can kind of think of as like, you know, what's going on specifically for that one day, kind of like the clothes you're wearing on a specific day, such as today. But climate is more so the average year after year condition. So it's similar more so to like the clothes in your closet, because you have clothes for year round, summer clothes, winter clothes, spring clothes, etc. So weather is a one day kind of situation, and climate is what goes on year round in a certain location. So you do want to write this entire slide down. So there are 5 things that cause climate to be the way it is, so make sure you write them down before you listen. Climate is caused by 5 things. The trapping of heat by the atmosphere. So there is a warmth to certain areas of the Earth, and actually all of Earth is technically warmer than it would be without our atmosphere. So some heat is trapped in our atmosphere, and that causes climate. The latitude at which you're at on the Earth, so how close you are to the poles or the equator, also makes your place have a certain climate. The movement of heat by winds and by the ocean will also give you a certain climate. The weather in certain beachy areas is going to be much different than areas that don't get a lot of wind or that get even more wind than those areas. Climate is also based on precipitation. You may remember that precipitation is the amount of wet stuff that comes down from the sky, such as rain, snow, sleet, etc. So the amount of precipitation also is part of climate. And finally, the elevation and shape of land masses. So mountains can shape climate by stopping rain from getting to certain areas, or how high you are may affect your climate. You may experience different weather conditions than if you were at a different area that was lower on the Earth. So all 5 of these things cause climate. All right, you do want to write down this question. The question is very important, and this will be asked of you on your test. How does the greenhouse effect maintain the biosphere's temperature range? So if we look at this picture, you can actually see very clearly how the greenhouse effect works. So we obviously have the Earth right here, and we have the sun right here. And what happens from the Earth is there are carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that are part of the atmosphere. And they act kind of as an earth blanket. So these gases trap in heat. They leave some of the heat to help warm the planet, and they don't bounce back further away from the atmosphere like this. They just stay here, and so you have all of this heat warming the planet. So that's how the greenhouse effect maintains the temperature range. And this slide here you do want to copy down because this explains the answer to the question on the previous slide. The greenhouse effect is when there's gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor, plus many more, and these gases will trap heat from the sun and keep it underneath that atmospheric blanket, if you will. Now, this greenhouse effect, it's referenced as the greenhouse effect because if you've ever been in a greenhouse, they're places where you store plants so that they can grow. This is my hideous example of a flower, oh my gosh. But a greenhouse is where plants grow, and it's usually very warm in a greenhouse, very high temperature because it's helpful for the plants. life on Earth does need a certain amount of warmth, and the greenhouse effect provides that. However, with the excess addition of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, the climate is warming a lot more rapidly than we would expect it to, and that's what's causing what we call climate change. Okay, you do want to copy this down. So latitude is very important for climate as well. So solar radiation is radiation from the sun, and it strikes different parts of the Earth's surface at different angles. And you want to make sure that you have, you want to make sure that you have these notes down as well. So at the equator, and hopefully you remember, but if you don't, the equator is this middle portion of the Earth here. At the equator, the sun is going to strike there most directly. Even though the Earth will rotate and will move around the sun as well, the sun rays will actually be hitting that a little bit more directly than at the higher latitude. So this is a higher latitude and this is a lower latitude. But the sun's heat is not going to carry as directly as it does to the equator region. So at the equator, energy from the sun strikes most directly. At the poles, it is at a lower angle. So those areas are typically colder. So like North Pole and Antarctica are colder than areas like where the rainforest is in Brazil. Okay, so you want to make sure that you know the 3 climate zones. So I have this question here. What are the Earth's main 3 climate zones? Please write that down. And then on the next slide, here's the answer to that question. The 3 main climate zones, which are a result of latitude, so they're a result of how high they are on Earth, such as what we see here. We have 3 main climate zones. We have polar zones, which are the highest and lowest latitudes. They are the furthest away from the equator, so they get the least amount of direct heat. We have the temperate zones, which are these green areas here, and these are areas that get kind of a middle amount of heat from the sun. It varies more greatly than it does for the polar regions or the tropical regions. And then the red area here, those are the tropical zones. Those are the closest to the equator, and those are going to get the most direct sunlight year-round, so those are going to stay the warmest. They're not going to have as many dramatic seasonal shifts as we see in places like the temperate forests, which do have more variable climates throughout the year because of their variable amount of sunlight. You will be tested on this material. You need to understand why these different zones have different climates, and it's partially because of the latitude and the angle of heating at which they are exposed to from the sun. Okay, so just make sure that you understand why the climate and temperatures in each zone vary. Remember, it does have to do with the angle of heating. On the next few slides, it goes over why. If you feel like you understand them without writing them down, you don't need to. But if you would like to write down the black stuff that you see on the next slides, that's completely up to you to help you study. So just to make sure that we understand, the polar zones are cold because the sun's rays strike at a lower angle. The temperate zones, those green zones, they sit between the polar and tropical zones, and they are more affected by changing the angle of the sun over the course of the year. So because they have a different angle that they receive sunlight at throughout the year, they have different seasons. They can range from hot to cold very frequently. They're the ones that see, spring, summer, winter, and fall very drastically different from each other. And then finally, the tropical zone is closest to the equator. It's the red zones, and those receive the most direct heat or sunlight year-round, so the climates are almost always warm. You definitely want to make sure that you write this down as well. One of the other factors that affects climate, so remember we mentioned 5 of them. You want to make sure you remember those 5. If you need to pause and review the 5 factors that affect climate, go for it. But just remember that the transport of heat also does affect climate. So the unequal heating of the Earth's surface drives wind and ocean currents. Because the sun hits at different angles in different places and the Earth is unequally heated, there will be winds that are created and ocean currents that are created. Now those winds and ocean currents will transport heat, and that will affect the different climate regions differently. So areas of the earth where you have more wind or different ocean currents, or the ocean currents are bringing warm water instead of cool water, the climate in those regions will be different based on that. And this image here just shows you some of the areas in red where warm currents flow, and in other areas in blue where cold currents flow, and that does affect the climate in those regions. Please remember this slide. This will help you for your test. It's important you understand that the winds and ocean currents will transport heat differently, and that causes change in climates. So the next questions are just review questions. I have the questions... Sorry about that. I have the questions listed here, and then following them, I do have the answer. So what you want to do is read the question, pause it, figure out what you want your answer to be, and then press play to see what the answer is, so that you can actually check and see how you're doing on these. So the question is, the Earth's polar zones are cold because, so pick your answer. And I am going to switch the slide now, so pause it, and then play it when you're ready to see. So the Earth's polar zones are cold because at the poles the sun's rays are at a lower angle than they are at any other zone. Okay, next question. Please read the question and pause it before you're ready to see the answer. So the Earth's temperature range is maintained by which of these following things? And the temperature range is in fact maintained by the greenhouse effect, which we talked about. The greenhouse effect is like the earth blanket. The greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide that trap heat, keep the planet warm so that life can be sustained. But if they trap more heat, they'll cause the climate to change as well. Okay, next question. The tropical zone is warm all year round because, so read through these and pick your answer before I switch the slide. Because of the... Oops, this was supposed to be, I'm sorry, because it is supposed to be, it's supposed to be that one there. So because it receives direct or nearly direct sunlight year-round. Okay, that's it for the climate notes, guys. You do need to know about climate on your test. This is an important topic that you do understand what climate is, and especially understanding the greenhouse effect, which I'll go back to. I want you all to understand how the greenhouse effect does aid in warming our climate and causing what we have discussed as climate change. And since a lot of you for your human impact projects are going to discuss climate change, it's really important that you understand this. If you have any questions, let me know, and we will of course be reviewing tomorrow.